Hi, everybody. Welcome to this session on safety and security. Thanks so much for joining us. Today, we are talking about all things sort of security and safety. I think the world has introduced some interesting new challenges lately between COVID-19 concerns, as well as sort of the opportunistic looting that took place during the peaceful protests of the murder of George Floyd. And so I think there's a lot of talk about here when it comes to keeping our customers, our products, our businesses, and our staff safe. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Our goal here is for this to be really interactive. So I'm going to ask a few questions. We're going to lay a really baseline kind of understanding of the topic today. But what we really want is for you all to engage with us. So please drop some questions in the chat. We're going to leave a decent chunk of time towards the end of this session to answer your questions. So please do interact with us. This is a short session. We only have 30 minutes, so we're going to talk really high level, and hopefully we'll be able to get to everybody's questions. So let's kick it off. Let me go ahead and introduce our amazing panelists. We have Courtney Jordan with us. Courtney, it's so great to have you here. Courtney is the managing partner at Vertical Companies and has decades of food safety experience. And she's going to give us some insights on sort of ramping back up production while maintaining safety of both the staff and of the products themselves. So Courtney, it's awesome to have you here. Then we have Tony Gallo. He is the managing partner of Sapphire Risk Advisory Group. He's a bit of a security expert. He's been operating in cannabis for a long time and really understands the kind of physical safety part of this conversation. So Tony, great to have you here. And last but not least, we have Krishi Koja. He's the principal and founder of Greenbridge Corporate Counsel. He's going to help us kind of understand liability and responsibility of companies when it comes to this topic. So I want to go ahead and jump in here. And Krishi, I want to kind of start with you. Can you help us understand, from a very high level, kind of what is the responsibility, what is the liability for cannabis companies, specifically around COVID-19?
Yeah, at a super high level, we're dealing with mandates that are put in place by federal and state legislation, specifically the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970. That contains what's called a general duty clause, and the general duty clause is short. I'll read it to you. Each employer shall furnish to each of his employees employment and a place of employment which are free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm to his employees. And shall comply with occupational safety and health standards promulgated under this act. So what that means essentially is, you can't keep an employee from getting sick. Every instance of an employee getting sick isn't your responsibility. But where we have a pandemic like with COVID-19, and it's a very serious illness, it could cause death, it could cause serious injury. You do have a responsibility to ensure that you are doing everything you can to mitigate the risk of your employees actually contracting COVID-19. And so what that means essentially is, you are, and Courtney will get into this a lot more later on, but what you're doing is providing a safe space for your employees to come to. You are doing things like testing to ensure that folks are, before they come into work, that they don't have a fever. You're ensuring that your workspaces are clean and disinfected, and you're isolating those sources of exposure to COVID, and essentially, trying to minimize the impact of that on your employees. So that's your kind of general obligation under federal law. Add to that also requirements that the Bureau of Cannabis Control has put into place. They've said essentially you have to follow all the CDC guidelines that are put into place by CDC to deal with this. And then you've got Cal OSHA as well, which is a state corollary of OSHA, and you have to follow all those mandates on top of that. And then you've got, even further, you've got local mandates as well. Your local public health department, your state public health department, all have guidance, and they all have very robust websites. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail as to what exactly those obligations are, but I'm happy to talk about afterwards about that as well. So you're not obligated to keep people healthy. That's not something that you have an obligation to do, but you do have to keep them free of risk of contracting COVID as best as you can.
So, obviously this happened quickly. I think most businesses were kind of caught unprepared, and then we had the essential business sort of status of cannabis. So, how have businesses been able to respond? Has the essential status changed kind of the expectation of what the businesses are required to do?
Yeah, I mean, arguably, if you are deemed an essential business, then the standards are actually a little bit higher. Folks might think the opposite, that, well, I'm an essential business, and so I'm going to get a little slack here. That's not actually the case, right? You've got a higher risk. Your employees are at higher risk for contracting COVID-19. And so if you have somebody, for example, that was sick, was ill, bringing them back into the workforce, right, is something that you have to do very carefully and very thoughtfully, and again, containing as much risk as you possibly can to your other employees, to your customers that are there. And so, people who think, well, I'm an essential business, so I've got a little bit more leeway. It's not actually the case. You actually have more responsibility than others because of the level of exposure that a cannabis business has, especially retail and delivery, right? You're looking at least a medium risk category, maybe not very high. You're not in an ER, but you are dealing with the general public, so you have that obligation.
So, Courtney, I want to kick it to you because I think this parlays really nicely. What should cannabis businesses be doing here to kind of keep everybody safe, especially given what Kirsty's just said about sort of even maybe higher, burden?
Sure. I think you have to look at it in a couple different ways. One, internally, what are you doing to keep your employees safe? And two, what are you doing to keep your customers, patients safe as they're coming through your doors? And are you servicing them outside? Are you servicing them inside? How much hands-on touch are you able to eliminate during this process? Some of the things I like to see is, everybody COVID testing their employees, right? We want to make sure everybody starts off coming in with a clean bill of health, temperature checking before every shift. Also, setting up your schedule of employees to work with the same group of people on a daily basis per shift, and making sure you have very stringent cleaning regulations put in place between each shift. So really to minimize any cross-contamination. So my background is food safety and manufacturing. So this, fits into that cross-contamination part. Besides the temperature checks, are your employees wearing gloves? Are they changing their gloves regularly when they're interacting with product, patients, money, all of those, any cross-contamination where there could be an occurrence of it? Are they wearing masks? Are their masks getting cleaned every day? Are they, reusable ones? Are they using disposable ones? Shields, I found and have been seeing and reading the shields tend to protect a lot more and will keep an employee safer from, eye, nose, what have you. Sanitizer. Are you setting up, is your operation, whether it's a grow, extraction, or dispensary, are you set up with enough antibacterial sanitizer? Are you using one that's over 75% alcohol? Social distancing. Are you really monitoring the flow of traffic? So in some locations, I've seen where you can go back and forth, and in other locations, it's just one directional, which I highly recommend not having anybody backtrack and just moving traffic through in whatever way that is, whether it's outside or whether it's inside. Asking your employees before they start work, do you feel safe today? How are you feeling? Some of these will help on the back end, of just asking that question, because a lot of people are afraid to say they don't feel safe, or, is there something we could do to make you feel safer? I think it's all about being proactive and really talking to your staff and doing ongoing training with them. Designate a cleaning crew and make sure that all the cleaning supplies are kept in a safe, dry place and are also being rotated and changed through shifts. Again, shift schedules, very important. Make sure the same people are working together on a daily basis, shift basis, weekly basis. And, some of the things I've seen are like, and been working with too, are like going back to work kits. And how do are you providing those for your employees? How much of that are you providing to your employees? Are you doing anything from the customer patient side of it? Are you, providing hand sanitizer, hand washing stations? What is that interaction? Are you going paperless in regards to no cash, which is, as we know, difficult in this industry? So those are some of the high level.
Okay.
Things.
Yeah.
Out to me in regards to if you need any of these supplies, I certainly have been sourcing them and happy to help.
Okay. Yeah. We hopefully we'll get some more questions. We can dig a little bit deeper into that. Courtney, thank you. And just switching gears slightly, right? So COVID's obviously a newer concern. Safety of products has always been important, but now with COVID, we've got this unique challenge. Something that's maybe not as new is the physical safety of these businesses, right? I mean, I think cannabis has been a hot spot for violence for a long time due to its sort of cash-heavy nature. So Tony, I think the recent sort of opportunistic looting that happened kind of brought this back up and sort of brought this conversation back up. Can you talk a little bit about how do these businesses keep their businesses safe on a high level? And then we can kind of dig in a little deeper.
Sure. So one of the things that we've seen is that a lot of companies, although they may have had an emergency plan, maybe they had it in their application when they got their license, they really didn't have the plan in front of them. They weren't very, as Courtney said, very proactive when it comes to emergency procedures. And when the looting began, we dealt with clients in 24 states we've been involved in. We dealt with over 200 clients. And one of the common themes that we've seen during this looting that was occurring was that a lot of the owners did not have their emergency plan either in place or did not understand what their emergency plan that they had designed is going to do when it comes to a looting situation. And it's very common when you design that emergency plan, you're looking really for the normal emergency, a hurricane if you're in Florida, or some sort of situation where there's a fire or medical emergency. But you really aren't planning for a looting event, which is entirely different than a break-in event of a normal person trying to break into your location, or let's say even an earthquake if you're in California. How do you handle that? So I think a lot of cannabis owners, especially in California, were caught pretty flat-footed when it comes to how their physical security would play into a looting environment compared to the normal break-in, and that became apparent. I think we're going forward now having additional physical security in place, I think, is going to be the norm more so than what might have been prior to this event.
Can you elaborate a little bit on what you mean by sort of additional physical tools? Like, are you talking security guards? Maybe you can talk a little bit about the sort of armed, unarmed part of California's.
So a normal situation that occurs, a break-in at night when no one's at the location, someone breaks into your location, or a robbery during the daytime, is all time generated, which means that the bad guy only has X amount of time to defeat your security system and to take whatever they are. If it's a robbery, obviously they want to get in and get out as quick as possible. If it's a break-in, if they can't bypass your alarm system or whatever, they want to get in and get out. In a looting situation, time is not really a factor anymore. So let's say you had a dispensary and you had bars on your front window or shatterproof glass on the front of your window. Well, that's a great thing to have in normal security, where it's going to expand the time for someone to break in. But it really has no value whatsoever in a looting environment because they have all the time in the world to smash that glass or to pull the bars off. So a roll down, like a hurricane roll down, we found was very effective. We saw a number of dispensaries where those roll downs were used and they moved down to the next dispensary down the street during the looting and did not enter through that. Same thing with safes and vaults. A lot of the cannabis facilities in California use what's called a gun safe. A gun safe is a metal box that you store firearms in, but it's not a regular traditional safe that you would see in a jewelry store, department store. And of the 253 looting events nationwide that we saw, not one of those, they're called TL-rated safes, was breached, but we know of over 40 gun safes that were breached, and primarily most of those were in California. Again, because the looters had more than enough time to cut into the side of that safe, they were able to defeat it. So when I talk about physical security, a lot of times you look at the physical security or the emergency plan that you have in place at your location for the normal robbery attempt or the normal break-in at night attempt. But now you're going to have to look at it for what would occur if someone had an unlimited amount of time to attack your location. And I think that's the new norm now since the looting has occurred.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we've sort of set a nice sort of stage here, right, of these topics. So we want to invite questions from the audience. Please go ahead and sort of drop your questions in here, and we're going to get to them as we kind of continue this conversation. A question that just came through, which I think is a great question. What are sort of the risks, of tomorrow, right? So what are we thinking about kind of going forward in terms of maybe what we should be preparing for? I know, Tony, you're talking about kind of reading and getting prepared for that. Anything else that is sort of top of mind, do you think?
So from my end, I think one of the things that's top of mind is the training of the employees. What's their responsibility? What's their role, especially now when it comes to safety issues? How are they going to interact with the customers? What are the new rules of engagement, as I call it? Whether it's a safety issue for the virus, whether it's a procedural issue when it comes to the exposure of too much cash at the location. I think that the need for additional training of employees to understand this new industry now, since the riots have occurred, and since the virus has occurred, how are they going to interact? And I don't see that as much as I like to in a lot of locations. I think a lot of businesses have gone back to normal, or they were open during the whole time, but they haven't taken in this consideration. And I think Courtney can even expand on the lack of wearing mask or the lack of interaction of using any kind of cleaner or anything like that from a safety point of view. And then the same thing from me, the amount of cash you're keeping in your register drawer, at the front, where maybe you should be putting it somewhere else and reducing that exposure.
Courtney, do you have any sort of thoughts on that?
Sure, happy to jump in. I think it's really important right now for everybody to have their SOPs mapped out, their standard operating procedures, and have a dedicated QA QC person in any environment in this space, whether you're growing, extracting, manufacturing, distributing, or in a retail or even delivery, but having, a person per shift responsible of going through all the steps to, first it starts with just opening your eyes and watching and making sure everybody is handling cross-contamination properly. Also, as we're receiving products in, we don't know how they were handled before they got to our door. So what are we doing to ensure their cleanliness and safety? Are we wiping them down? Are we, holding them for 3 days prior to bringing them into the facility? Because if you think about it, and those boxes have already been contaminated as they're coming in the door and your employees are unpacking them, again, you're introducing your facility to to unsanitary measures from the outside.
I think that if Courtney and Tony, you both have sort of touched on an interesting concept here of things have changed, right? We're living in a very different world. Things are very different than they were even 6 months ago. And that puts a large burden on these operators to sort of retrain, rewrite SOPs. Khursheed, I'm kind of interested in your perspective on do these companies have what they need? Do they have the guidance that they need from a regulatory standpoint? What's going on, and are they getting what they need to get this right?
Yeah. Well, it's important to note that, the employer's obligations don't really change over time, right? We talked about this general duty obligation. It's very broad. And so this individual circumstances may change, from week to week, month to month, but the obligation of the employer does not change, right? And so every risk of tomorrow that comes up is something that, you have to look at individually what to do there. So in terms of kind of how the regulators have reacted to this, California initially was not allowing curbside delivery, for example. And the regulators, starting with the local health officials, they say, hey, look, you guys can't have folks come into the store anymore. This is not going to be something that we can sustain. And so the regulators were able to provide accommodations to licensees, and God bless the BCC for having the foresight to have a disaster relief provision already built into the regulations, because, when I had clients come to me saying, hey, we can't have folks in the store anymore, it's too unsafe. But we're also not allowed to deliver, or in our jurisdiction, or we're not allowed to do curbside delivery. What do we do? It didn't take more than a couple of minutes after reaching out to Lori Ajax at the BCC to be pointed in that direction, and every request that we were able to make for clients on the basis of an emergency relief regulation was granted, right? And so you have the proliferation of curbside pickup in California as a result. One of the engineering changes, they would call them, in terms of kind of how you have interactions between workers and customers. And so I think there is some regulatory flexibility built into the system in California, and you've seen the regulators and businesses react to that and make that the norm in California. I think going forward, delivery is also going to proliferate. It's just a better means of delivering cannabis, especially if we're all sheltering in place. And so figuring out what the unique risks are there, especially in the time of a pandemic and time of increased violence generally, right? How do you protect those workers? That's the next sort of I think battery of tests that retailers are going to have in the cannabis industry.
Yeah, we got a question in here about from Sarah saying, police response time in LA is really long. Kind of thoughts on getting the police to respond quicker. I wonder if this is sort of what you're talking about, Khursheed, sort of talking to the regulators and helping make these issues clear, or if you have any thoughts on that at all, or anybody.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think in different jurisdictions, the police have different roles, right? So in San Jose, the San Jose PD is very much part of the regulatory system, and in other jurisdictions, not so much. And in LA, they obviously had some pretty massive opportunistic looting and rioting. And so, not surprised to hear that their response time was lower than it might otherwise be. But part of it is also, zoning. It's an issue of zoning, right? Where you put these businesses, either make them easier to protect or harder to protect. And a lot of the zoning decisions that cities have made have pushed cannabis businesses to the outskirts, where it is harder to get a police response. And so I think that needs to change going forward when we think about retail.
Last question. We've got a couple minutes here that just came in. With these increased issues, COVID, safety concerns, how can these cannabis operators retain employees? Is there a way that they can go about sort of retaining that? I think that applies to all three of you, so I'd love to hear your feedback.
I'm happy to jump in really quick. I think this goes back to having the conversation and making sure that all your employees feel safe when they're coming to work. I think that's the fundamental aspect of it. I know I've been going out to a lot of facilities and locations, kind of identifying areas of weakness and helping support the operators to create a safer environment for their employees, and even speaking to employees about some, simple cross-contamination rules and regulations, or when you're using the restroom, and all of these things that really apply to like my old world in food service, but bringing it into cannabis seamlessly because of the cross-contamination aspect of this and the spread. And I feel like with an employee basis, it's really about making your employees feel safe and backing it up with making sure they have the supplies they need to stay safe.
Yeah, I can chime in with from a security point of view. We have clients from Davis, California, down to Desert Hot Springs, California, and the one thing universally that we see and we're hearing is from a security point of view, and like Courtney chimed in about safety, how are the employees going to make sure that they're not targeted from any kind of violent armed robbery attempts? What is their role going to be if someone does try and rob that location, and what additional security could put in place? And one of the things that adding emergency panic devices, taking some training that we learned from the jewelry industry or the pawn shop industry, and adding that into the cannabis, I think you'll find a lot of dispensary owners, and a lot of the target is dispensaries more so than the cultivation or manufacturing. And you'll find a lot of those owners are now incorporating that to make their employees feel a little bit more comfortable when they're at the location. And I think that's going to deal a lot with retention.
That's awesome. I think we've got 3 minutes. We've got one last question, and I'm see if we can get through really quick. Is the delisting of cannabis addresses on public websites, do you think that's temporary? Do you think that's something that's more permanent?
I don't think it has any value whatsoever in the looting. And let me tell you why. The looters are going down a street and they're looking at locations and it says dispensary and then they loot it. Looters aren't pulling out the paper and saying, oh, look, there's a dispensary 15 miles away from here. We're all going to get a bus and drive there. So taking the addresses off weren't really material in any of the looting from St. Louis all the way anywhere that we've been involved in, simply because the looters weren't driving to loot one location. They were walking down the street and looting whatever they would see. So taking the addresses for this particular situation had no value. It could in the future have value if someone was thinking about robbing particular areas, but for this it didn't. Got it.
All right. Well, I think that's about time. Thank you all so much for joining us. I hope that everybody got something out of this. If you have additional questions, I know that our panelists are going to be around in the I don't know where they'll be. They'll be around. So find them and ask your questions. And thank you again for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.